Hi, hope you guys are well. I want to first apologize sincerely for being so delayed in getting a video recorded. I've been working on getting media sites set up, and it took about, well, at least the copyright course that took me several days to complete. And then afterwards, I had some challenges getting it set up on Blackboard and getting it linked, and I'm still trying to kind of play with it and figure it out. So what I'm hoping to do sort of in the coming weeks is figure out how to do video presentations along with PowerPoint slides so I can sort of organize information a little bit better and share it with you and things like that. But I will, in the coming week, try to do sort of an additional video on some of the reading. Today, what I want to do is just outline maybe some broad concepts related to the reading and add a little bit of contextual information that might help with it. And then, share a little general information about the class and in general to just try to get better sort of making these videos and getting information uploaded. So I would love to hear back from you guys about if the videos are helpful or how they could be more helpful, topics that you'd like to have covered or things that I maybe left out, those kind of things. Also, too, my hope kind of with these is to make them ultimately a bit condensed, down to 10, 15 minutes to keep them really sort of compact, full of information and useful. So today, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about the readings from week 2, but also cover a little bit related to week 1. And just to let you know, I'm still making some, adjustments a little bit to the syllabus and things like that. I cut the critical response papers back to about 7, so I have to update the grading a little bit. So instead of being worth 0.75 points each, they'll be worth 2 points each, so that it kind of rounds out the total number of points for the class and things like that. So at this point, just some minor adjustments, but that too, I would love to hear your feedback on and get some information from you guys. So, okay, broadly speaking, I think with this course, a little bit is going to be about obviously curriculum design and development, but I think a broader sort of kind of aspect of this class is to understand more broadly the kind of social, political, and philosophical factors influencing curriculum development. So sort of stepping back and looking broadly at the historical and philosophical context of curriculum development in the U.S. Since the progressive era, and understanding, I think, with the readings, especially for the last week and for this week and in the coming few weeks, it should really give you an understanding of how different sort of philosophical movements and ideas and historical factors shaped curriculum development over time. And going into this upcoming week, if you look at Tyler, which I think is a book that's more maybe procedural or practical in a sense in terms of developing curriculum, you'll see, I think, a good companion along with the other book and chapters that we're reading from, authors like Bobbitt and Dewey and Jane Addams and others. And, looking at how, for example, in the curriculum process, the sort of starting point are the broader values, philosophy, and kind of ideas that shape curriculum, how factors outside of the school, impact objectives of learning, philosophy related to the objectives of learning, those kinds of things. So, and to give you a little bit, so to sort of step back a little bit and give you a little bit about the week 1 readings, I just wanted to kind of mention that Bobbitt, the first author we read, is very much sort of caught up in the social efficiency movement. Now, what happened around the turn of the century was we saw industrialization. You saw, like Ford Motor Company, for example, and the assembly line. And that really has a dramatic impact on society. Taylorism became a primary guiding philosophy. This is the idea that was associated with assembly lines, the idea that each task could be broke down into its component parts. and then could be easily sort of replicated over time. And you can see that, at least to me, when you're reading Bobbitt, you see that language of efficiency, compartmentalization. He uses the example of a bricklayer, and learning that process and how that can be broken down into its parts, into the most effective parts. Now, I do think Bobbitt is, someone in education who was a bit more nuanced than a lot of, at least a number of the other figures in the social efficiency movement. Um, but definitely sort of caught up in that belief system of the time period, preparing kids for their role in life, fostering ability, and things like that. And he does note, though, when I say he's more nuanced, like he does note that fields like history and geography and other things are a bit more complex, in terms of how they need to be sort of compartmentalized and broke down. But that is, I think, his overall sort of function, or aim. And you could really, I think, contrast Bobbitt with Maria Montessori and John Dewey, who are a bit different in their approach. Um, a little bit about Dewey, obviously, also a progressive era figure. Um, you know, um, I think, sort of a reaction to the social efficiency movement. For Dewey, if you look at the history of philosophy a little bit, you have Plato, who in the Republic orients education entirely around society. Education is about making the better society, the better community. If you look at the contrary to that, like Rousseau, who was all about the individual. Education, in his book A Meal or On Education is all about, the function of education for the individual, preparing the individual, and society kind of corrupts the individual. Now, for Dewey, this idea of society or the individual is kind of a false dichotomy and problematic. Dewey thinks that, in a sense, he's trying to bridge both Plato and Rousseau, or to say that both of them are sort of inherently wrong. For Dewey, the best society is one in which creates kind of the conditions for the individual. Creates a positive environment for people to explore their individualism or to sort of exist as individuals. And then likewise, the individual can only sort of exist or be successful or kind of develop themselves in relation to a broader community and context. So both are sort of dependent and interrelated. And for Dewey, education and curriculum is about sort of fostering that context. That's why you see this emphasis on the right society, or the social aspects of education. Education is having an inherently, social component to it. Maria Montessori, as well. And I think one of the things that gets associated with both of them is the kind of cliche child-centered learning or student-centered learning, which I think is inherently problematic. And if you read them, I think you can see both of them kind of noting the extent to which education and the educational process is responsible for creating, thoughtful, kind of dynamic individuals. That sort of educational process, even though it might be oriented towards the child's inherent interests and curiosities, and things like that, there's a strong kind of social impact and aspect to it that they're trying to foster. And of course, that can only be done and kind of guided by somebody in the field of education who's thoughtful and focused on that situation. And then steering that a bit into our upcoming week, you have Jane Addams, who's kind of the matriarch of modern day social work. She sort of founded the social work kind of profession in a sense, or at least was one of those primary influences. Started the Hull Houses, the Hull House in Chicago, which was a kind of a boarding home in a sense for new immigrants. In Chicago, she hung out with John Dewey. They were friends. They communicated often. And I think if you look at, approaches to immigrant education, I always find kind of even though maybe it's overly simplistic and again a kind of problematic dichotomy, but the two approaches either being additive or subtractive. Um, and you could apply that to bilingual education, or you could apply that to, work with immigrant or refugee children. And additive being the idea of, of course, both sides want Americanization, want to teach kids English, want them to be able to be successful here, to learn customs, culture, those kind of things. Additive seeks to find a balance with their home culture and their American identity. Subtractive would be the idea we need to get rid of that home culture or home language in order for them to be successful or properly Americanized. Jane Addams, I think, the schools at this time period tended to drift toward subtractive Americanization. Jane Addams, I think, in which you can read her promoting in the chapter we read, is additive Americanization, using that immigrant culture and identity and language and things to help foster education and the learning process. And then, I think, too, would be something aligned with Dewey. And to take this into George Counts, and to give you a little bit, I think Counts is a bit of a contemporary of Dewey and Kilpatrick and other progressive educators. Counts is, and maybe a bit of a shift away from Dewey, or I don't know, in some ways maybe more taking Deweyan principles a bit further. Counts is more, I think, a social reconstructionist. He's more interested in the function of education and the curriculum in shaping American society. And that was something that was core Dewey, but I think maybe evolved a bit in Dewey over time. And I think something that's maybe a bit more implicit in Dewey and a little bit more explicit in Counts. Counts is more clearly, pushing a kind of educational process that's oriented toward reshaping society for the better. At least in what in his mind was better. And if you look again at his context, I mean, the piece that we read comes from a book written, I want to say maybe 1932, 33, somewhere around that time. So you're looking at the rise of fascism, you're looking at the kind of, period between World War I and World War II, where you're seeing, racism. He was someone who was in contact with W.E.B. Du Bois and other leaders from the NAACP, things like that. So, Counts is looking at those kind of issues, and labor movements, things like that happening around the United States, and I think hoping to deal with some of those issues through education, and the role of the curriculum should play in dealing with those kind of issues and helping resolve some of them. All right, so I just wanted to give you, again, a little bit of contextual information about the individuals we read. I'm going to work on doing a little bit better job with the coming week's reading. I'll try to get that got to you guys, in the coming days. And then I tried to respond. I want to thank you all for the introductions. It was great to hear about you guys. We have a great group of people, and I really sincerely appreciate the way in which you guys communicated and introduced yourself to each other. And I want to remind you guys, for the upcoming weeks, what I'm going to do is try to situate you guys into groups for discussion so that you can get to know each other and have a little more in-depth discussion. And then we'll mix those groups up throughout the semester to give you guys a chance to interact with each other and get to know each other. And, again, I would love your feedback on that, and if you think it's working well, or how you think it's working, or the amount of time you think that groups would work, those kind of things. So I will be in touch. I appreciate you guys being so patient and understanding, and again, just feel free to email me or text or call or anything with any questions or feedback or, concerns you guys have. Thank you.